The light was fading faster than it should. Not because of the time but because of the sheer density of the falling snow. For former wilderness guide Elias Vance, driving through the remote stretches of Montana with his 15-year-old daughter, Chloe, the speed of the weather shift was deeply unsettling. He had been through whiteouts before, but this was different. This was aggressive. "Dad, how much longer until we get to Granite Ridge?" Chloe's voice was small, cutting through the muffled quiet of the SUV's cabin. Elias gripped the steering wheel tighter. His knuckles were white against the dark leather. "Not long, honey. Maybe an hour, but we're going to have to slow way down. This isn't a regular snowstorm." He was driving a reliable, well-maintained truck, a modern fortress against the elements. But the elements, it seemed, had just declared war. A sudden violent gust of wind slammed into the passenger side, shaking the heavy vehicle like a tin can. Visibility dropped from 50 feet to 5 feet in the space of a heartbeat. Elias had been navigating based on feel, trusting the tires to grip the thin layer of ice. That trust was instantly betrayed. The truck hit a drift, a solid wall of compacted snow hidden beneath the swirling white curtain. The vehicle bucked violently, lurching to the left, and then everything ground to a terrifying, absolute stop. The engine whined, the tires spun uselessly, and then the air went silent. Elias turned the key. Nothing. Not even the hopeful growl of the starter motor. Just a dead click. He tried again. The battery was gone. The cold had done what the snow couldn't. It had immobilized them completely. He turned to his daughter. Chloe's eyes were wide, reflecting the faint blue light of the dashboard. She didn't cry, she didn't panic. She just looked at him, waiting for the command. It was the look he knew from years of camping trips, the quiet acknowledgement that the world had narrowed down to one thing. Him. Elias leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He had trained people for situations exactly like this, for unexpected crisis, for immediate life or death decisions. This wasn't a time for panic. This was a time for cold, quiet calculation. The mistake people made, the most fatal mistake, was believing the answer lay outside the car. They saw the warm light of a distant town in their mind and made a dash for it. But out there, the blizzard was a predator. He couldn't see the road, he didn't know the terrain, and the average person lost in a severe blizzard often became disoriented within minutes, walking in circles until exhaustion claimed them. "Rule number 1, Chloe," he said, his voice slow and steady, "we stay put." Chloe nodded, pulling her wool hat lower over her ears. "The car is our shelter." "It's the best shelter we have," Elias confirmed. "It has 3 essential things: walls, a roof, and an immediate source of insulation. Leaving it to walk even a quarter mile in this whiteout is a death sentence. We are safer here. We are discoverable here." He reached for the glove compartment. Not for the registration, but for the battered, old Army-issue first aid kit that had been there for 20 years. Inside, tucked beneath the bandages, was a small, brightly colored orange flag and a cheap metal whistle. Elias rolled down his window just enough to push the orange flag out. He tied it securely to the antenna, which was now barely visible above the mounting snowdrift, letting the bright fabric flutter against the blinding white. He then used his knife to cut a section of the emergency blanket and wedged it between the glass and the window frame, a small act of defiance against the cold. "This is our beacon," he explained. "The color of hope in a sea of white. It tells any search party that we are still here." His mind was already moving to the next critical step. The temperature inside the car was plummeting fast, mirroring the external drop. He had perhaps an hour before the cold became truly dangerous. "Okay, time for the car to become an igloo," Elias announced. He began removing all the loose items in the back. Duffel bags, blankets, extra coats, and even the floor mats. He instructed Chloe to stay wrapped in the emergency blankets, focusing on keeping her core warm. Meanwhile, he methodically shoved the floor mats against the windows, starting with the rear, to create an extra thermal layer. It was an awkward process, but the thick rubber and carpet provided surprisingly good insulation against the cold glass. The heavy duffel bags went against the doors, blocking any possible drafts. He even took the foam padding from the backseat headrests and used them to stuff small gaps around the door frames. "We're sealing the tomb," Chloe said, trying to joke, but her teeth were chattering slightly. "No, we're sealing the vault," Elias corrected, his voice firm. "This is how you turn a problem into a solution. Every seam, every gap, is a hole leaking out our precious warmth." But they couldn't just rely on insulation. They needed heat. Since the battery was dead, running the engine was out of the question for now. He knew he had to save whatever meager juice was left for the cranking of the engine if they could ever dig out, or for a quick distress flash of the interior light. Elias rummaged through the small backseat cooler, the one meant for soda and snacks. He pulled out a bag of dried apricots and a bottle of water. "We're rationing now," he said. "A small handful of high-calorie food every few hours. Your body is a furnace, Chloe. The food is the coal. We need to feed the fire to stay warm." He made sure she ate a few pieces immediately. He then looked at the water. It was already beginning to freeze at the top. This is critical. Dehydration in the cold is just as dangerous as hypothermia. He took a small empty plastic container and filled it with snow that he had scraped from the windshield before he sealed the windows. "Don't eat the snow," he warned. "It lowers your core temperature." He wrapped the container in a towel and placed it near his chest, using his body heat to melt the snow slowly into drinkable water. Night fell, bringing with it a more profound silence and a drop in temperature that felt like a physical weight pressing against them. The wind was a constant, low-frequency roar outside, punctuated by the occasional thump as a large chunk of snow hit the roof. Elias had estimated their remaining time before the cold became unbearable. It was time to use the engine. He found a collapsible shovel in the trunk, another essential piece of their survival gear. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. "I'm going to run the engine for 10 minutes, he told Chloe. "But I have to do something first. This is life or death, not hyperbole." He opened his door, pushing against the heavy snowdrift that had accumulated. The wind tried to snatch the door from his hand, ripping through his heavy coat. He quickly dropped to his knees in the swirling dark, navigating by memory. He crawled to the back of the truck, feeling for the exhaust pipe. It was completely buried. If the tailpipe is blocked by snow, running the engine will fill the car with odorless, invisible carbon monoxide, a guaranteed killer. Elias dug frantically with the small shovel, clearing a path around the tailpipe, making sure the deadly fumes had an escape route. He even jammed a sturdy, straight tree branch into the snow about 5 feet behind the car to act as a flag, ensuring the vent hole stayed clear. He crawled back inside, shivering violently, and slammed the door shut. "Ready?" he asked. Chloe nodded, wrapped tight in her blanket cocoon. He turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. He set an alarm on his old wristwatch for 8 minutes. Never 10. Always give yourself a buffer. The rush of warm air from the vents was intoxicating. It was the smell of life, a brief reprieve. "Why only 8 minutes?" Chloe asked, her voice sounding less strained. "Because we have limited fuel and an almost dead battery," Elias explained. "We run it for 8 minutes to raise the interior temperature, then shut it off and rely on our insulation to hold that heat for the next hour. We do this once every hour for 8 minutes. This conserves fuel and prevents the engine from freezing solid. It's a pacing game." They sat in the quiet warmth, watching the minutes tick by. Elias knew the real enemy wasn't the cold, it was despair and inaction. He thought of his old friend, Garrison, a SEAL he'd trained in high-altitude endurance. Garrison always used to say, "A storm is just a decision made by nature. Your response is the only decision that matters." Elias's composure wasn't just calmness, it was a strategy, a razor-sharp control. The first night was an eternity. The second day was a blur of routine. Clear the exhaust, run the engine, melt snow, eat apricots, and wait. The snow showed no sign of letting up. Elias knew their situation was dire, but he had to maintain the illusion of control for Chloe. "Okay, 10 minutes of high-intensity wiggling," Elias announced on the second afternoon. Chloe stared at him. "Wiggling? Feet, toes, fingers? Clap your hands. We need to keep the blood moving," he ordered. "If your body is moving, it's generating heat. Hypothermia starts with the extremities. You need to fight the urge to just sit still." They spent 10 frantic minutes flapping their arms, wiggling their toes inside their boots, and even playing a quiet game of 20 questions to keep their minds sharp. Elias even had a small flashback to a terrible solo trip years ago, where he had to sing nursery rhymes to himself for 48 hours straight to stay awake and sane. Midway through the second night, Elias woke up to silence. He checked his watch. He had missed his hourly check. 70 minutes had passed. The air in the car was stinging cold, and Chloe was shivering uncontrollably. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to break his resolve. He felt like the guards in that story, realizing he had just made a critical mistake. But just like the Marine, he had to click back into survival mode. "Chloe, listen to me," he whispered, his voice shaking. "We're okay. We need to warm up now." He immediately wrapped her in his own thick coat, pushing her against his chest. He turned the key. The engine was sluggish. It coughed, then caught. He didn't dare turn it off until the 8 minutes were up. The cold was insidious. It made you complacent, it made you not care. Dad, what if no one comes? Chloe asked, her breath misting the air. Elias held her tighter. They will come. Because we did everything right. We stayed put, we stayed visible, and we conserved our energy. We just need to give them time to find our beacon. They had been trapped for 52 hours. Elias was exhausted, rationing their last few apricots and trying to convince himself the melted snow tasted fine. He had cleared the exhaust pipe 6 times already that morning. The blizzard had finally begun to abate, leaving behind a sky of bruised gray and a silence that was almost painful. The snowdrifts outside the window were massive, burying the car almost entirely. They were effectively living in a snow cave now. Elias was staring blankly at the dark roof of the car, trying to muster the strength to do the wiggling routine, when a sound broke through the silence. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the snow shifting. It was a rhythmic, distant thrumming. He sat bolt upright. Chloe stirred. What is that? That, Elias whispered, a faint smile touching his lips, is the sound of faith being rewarded. He rolled down the window, the one he had strategically left slightly easier to open, and grabbed the metal whistle. He blew 3 sharp, short blasts, then 3 long ones, then 3 short ones again. SOS. He had to be quick. The noise would carry in the still air, but the searchers would be moving fast. He heard the engine of a snowmobile before he saw it. Then, a figure appeared on a rise in the distance, a dark silhouette against the white. It was Garrison, his old friend, now heading up the county search and rescue team. The bright orange flag tied to the antenna was flapping weakly in the residual breeze. Garrison stopped his snowmobile 20 feet away, killing the engine. He just stared at the buried SUV for a moment, then at the bright orange flag. Vance? Garrison yelled, his voice strained with relief. You maniac. You okay in there? Elias opened the door, kicking a mound of snow out of the way. The rush of cold, clean air was heavenly. I'm better than okay, Garrison, Elias replied, helping Chloe out of the buried cabin. I just followed the manual. Garrison walked over, his face grim but his eyes full of respect. We almost missed you. Your signal was the only thing visible for miles. The police had a low-risk plan of just waiting out the storm, but I insisted we send a high-altitude team following the last known coordinates and looking for the bright flag. Elias nodded. It was the quiet acknowledgement of a job done right. Garrison hadn't seen a victim. He had seen a fellow survivor who knew the rules. Elias hadn't needed to reveal a badge or an ally to silence the room. His knowledge had been his authority. Elias watched as the rescue team started digging them out, preparing for the long trip back to safety. Chloe, wrapped in a warm blanket provided by one of the rescuers, was already drifting off to sleep. Survival is not about heroics. It's about patience. It's about humility. It's about accepting the brutal facts of your situation and using knowledge to find the tiny, elegant solutions. Elias realized that the blizzard, like any great crisis, was a test of character. It didn't care what you looked like, what you owned, or what title you held. It only cared about your next decision. And in the silence of the snow, staying still had been the most powerful action of all. We often think the answer is to run, to fight, to make noise. But sometimes, when the world is chaos, true strength is the stillness of patience, and the faith that the beacon you put up will eventually be seen.